I want everybody to introduce themselves because about half of the people have not participated in one of my Plato courses, and so some of the people are old hands, as it were, and some are new to this process. So let me just start while we're waiting still. My plan in the last few classes, what I have done is to ask people to role play on a volunteer basis, to role play the characters in the dialogues, and that seemed to be quite helpful. And I started to plan to do that on this particular one, but I found that there were some difficulties doing that, and so that's an issue that I want to come back later. Maybe while we are waiting for everybody, and it might be that they're having some kind of troubles signing in. I heard from two people who were having such difficulties, and I forwarded all that to Lynn. So maybe we could just start with questions that you have. In this first part, from the time that he talks with the old codger, and then the argument is picked up by Polemarchus, and finally then Thrasymachus barges in, and we have that whole section, and so that's the part that I thought we might talk about today. So let's see what questions you have. Oh, it's all clear to everybody.
I don't know enough to have any questions yet.
Oh, there's Adrian. Adrian, you got in.
Hi there. How are you?
Okay, good.
Good to see you, Forrest.
Good to see you.
I had a question about how old Socrates was arguably at that moment, and my marginalia note says 59 years old. I don't know where I got that.
Yes, that sounds right to me. I had some notes, and they all got kind of mashed up with a whole lot of other stuff I'm trying to deal with. So let's go with 59, which makes that still 10 years before his death, 11 years. I thought that he was younger for this dialogue. So that's one of the things I have a note on, and I can't find it, Charlie.
Well, anyway, it's just as a side note, we can say we're probably a lot older than he was. Therefore, given some of his theories, we could argue that we're a little older and wiser than he was when he wrote or had these Q&As with everybody. So we can embolden ourselves to challenge him here and there.
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
Thank you.
I was surprised at the emphasis that he put on one's sexual abilities as they age in that chapter.
Yes.
And I'm wondering whether Viagra was a Greek word or not.
Oh my!
But
That's you.
I thought it was a very contemporary conversation that was going on there.
Okay. Did you notice that Socrates talks about sexual matters in terms of a man and a woman, unlike in the Symposium, where the ideal seems to be sexually, at least at the beginning, between an older man and a younger man. And so there's a lot of debate about how much homosexuality played a part in Greek upper class society, but certainly here and later on, sexual relations are between men and women.
But clearly, every party they went to was a toga party.
Yeah. Yeah. Don't you wish you were there?
Yeah. Is this the only discourse in which Plato inserts some of his relatives, his brothers, I guess, in
No,
this case?
no, they appear elsewhere, especially in the Apology. They appear. So no, it isn't the only place where he brings them in.
Hmm.
And he brings in his uncle who is mentioned here, Critias. Uh, yeah, he reaches out to people that he knows. Thrasymachus was a noted sophist, one of those money-making teachers.
Are the various characters, the voices in this dialogue, representative of classes or distinct philosophical value embracing groups within Athenian society?
Say that. So this is Ron Kopicki. Is that
Picky,
correct?
right. That's correct.
Okay, Kopicki. This is Ron joining us. Um, can you repeat that, please?
I wonder whether at least the first book is creates characters who simply espouse philosophical perspectives that are interesting to challenge, or whether instead they represent groups of society, subgroups within Athens that embrace these perspectives with regard to justice,
Yes,
that embrace the
yeah,
values that are inherent in those beliefs.
yeah, good
Rich
question.
and poor, etc., members of various philosophical persuasions, etc.
Yeah, it's Plato always has, except toward his very late dialogues, he always has characters who are drawn from real life. Whether they actually espouse what Plato puts in their mouth, it's very hard for us to know. Actually, we know something about Thrasymachus from other sources, but as for most of these characters, I think we have to think of them as being mouthpieces for philosophical positions that Plato wants to explore through his character Socrates.
The elderly gentleman had some very interesting views, and I noticed as I've read into a couple additional books that he sort of disappeared from the scene. At least I think that's the case. I'm the book 5, but I liked his point of view and some of the questions early posed about age and its benefits and its disadvantages, the perspective of older people. These are issues that are raised. I don't know if they're elaborated anywhere else. I would have loved to hear more about this elder gentleman's point of view. It might be very helpful for me. In any case, maybe other people who are part of the class.
Okay, so let's
Is
get
there any
clear.
follow-up? Does he disappear from?
Well, look at the end. He says, "Sorry, I can't talk anymore. I've got to go off to the festival."
Right.
And so he scurries out. He's obviously not willing to engage Socrates any further, uh, and so uh, and so he hands the discussion over to Polemarchus, who then has a long discussion with Socrates. So it's hard to tell how wise. Well, let's ask that question. How wise is this old man? Supposedly, being old brings wisdom, and so I must be very wise because I'm so old. Then some of you are getting along there. My brother Lee, who's older than I, must be very wise. So, Lee, what does growing older provide in the way of wisdom?
It's a great period of life. Lots of opportunities to do interesting things, read interesting books, follow the news, think about life and its meaning, write a blog, and so on. It's great. I'm coming into my own finally.
Yeah, me too. Me too.
Yeah.
I've always been trying to catch up to Lee, but I never can quite make it. So Lee gives a view of old age that seems to be quite different. How is that so?
Well, I don't think of myself as being old. I'm soon hitting 95, but I feel like I'm in my late 50s. And I try to act that way instead of succumbing to this notion that old age, means your mind is failing, your body is deteriorating, and you're ready to cash in. I'm not ready at all.
Okay, but so is Cephalus the same as Lee? Cephalus says, of course, old age is really neat because he doesn't have to deal with his sexual impulses anymore. But then you remember that he makes an argument that the nice thing about old age is he's got loads of money that he can do whatever he wants with. Lee also has loads of money, but he doesn't talk about that in terms of his happiness.
May I ask a few questions?
Yeah.
I'm John Malin.
John Malin, is it?
Correct. I'm the new kid on the block. I just wonder whether we could get a bit of structure going, and if you could tell us what the scope and the objectives of this particular course are. I'm very sorry, the call just started.
Sure. I'm not here to sort of provide a lot of facts, but I think it's fair to say that this whole dialogue is about a question, but it's a question that can be formulated in different ways. The question, one way to formulate it is to say, what is a good life? Another way to formulate it is to say, why should we try to have a good life? Why should we try to be moral people? What kind of, as I said in the little blurb orally, what is the life that's worth examining? Why is morality important in life? And finally, one other way to formulate it is, what's the relationship between morality and happiness? So there you have it, and a good question from John, because these questions are what this whole dialogue is all about. I wanted you to read it through first as a sort of short story so that you would get a sense of Plato's literary skills. But the whole dialogue, if we look at it in terms of philosophy, is all about these questions. What is a good life? What's the relationship between morality and a good life? And it's posed right from the beginning with his meeting his old friend, literally and figuratively, his old friend, Cephalus.
Can I just point out, I spent my money-making years as a political scientist, which is why I didn't earn much. And I read Plato. I read Republic, although I guess I used to, until recently, call it The Republic. Nobody corrected me back in the day. Frankly, I don't remember a lot about it, or I didn't remember a lot about it, because the emphasis, as I remember being taught, was always on the collective. The big question of the day really was, is Plato a totalitarian or a Democrat? And that, I think, reflects the kind of intellectual concern of the times of the Cold War period. And I don't remember ever talking about this particular work of Plato as an exploration of individual morality. So this is all very new to me, and revelatory.
Yes, you probably had a bad teacher.
I did not have you for this, as I remember.
Oh, you did. I thought
I
maybe
must have. I had a basic philosophy course with you, so I'm sure you talked about it. But
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that one of the things that that we see in this first book, certainly from Cephalus, is this definition of a role of someone who accepts law, who receives a normalized sense of justice from higher authorities, from government, as it were, and who is in a sense on the demand side of the ledger, someone who is who acknowledges authority, who believes in justice, and who believes that the source of that justice is the system that presides and governs over most people. And maybe there's an association between that role, more subordinate, more accepting, and age and seniority. It's not someone who wants to, in the case of Cephalus, challenge that orthodoxy or submit that a different way of creating laws and of establishing norms and standards for justice is appropriate to the one that presides currently.
Well, but does that have anything to do with the fact that the system has obviously served him very well? He's well off, he's comfortable, he can enjoy old age in a way that a poorer man perhaps could not. I think it does raise the question of how we were talking about old age and the extent to which the fulfillment that some people feel in old age is a function of basic comfort level, just physical comfort level, which is at least partly a result of their financial circumstances. They can afford.
Well, I have an observation back to that discussion of what makes us comfortable as we age, and that's the idea that's brought up later in the dialogue about inner harmony and harmony within the inner parts of a person, because I think as we get older, we hopefully are more harmonious and less in conflict with ourselves.
How do we reach that kind of harmony?
Well,
according to, let me take you off the spot. I didn't mean to put you on it. According to Plato, or according to the Socrates in this dialogue. In a way that comes, I think, much later in the dialogue. So we could kind of hold that in abeyance. Getting back to Richard's point, has Richard come back with us?
Yes.
I don't have him. Do you have Richard?
He's muted. Richard, you're muted.
Oh, well, I can't even see him.
Yeah, he's on the screen. He's muted.
Oh, okay.
Okay, I'm
No,
unmuted.
there he is.
Oh, there he
All
is. Okay, I'd like to. So Richard raised the question about how this dialogue has been treated in the past, and that became a popular kind of interpretation. I'd like to put that whole issue off until our next meeting.
Okay.
So I'd like us to stay with the beginning, where the question seems to be, Keflis, are you living a good life? I mean, I'd like to learn from you. You must be wise in your old age, Socrates says. And then when he bugs out, he picks up the dialogue, the discussion with Polemachus, and they are pursuing the same sort of question. It's all about the individual.
Mhm.
So for this class today, let's stick with that question about the individual.
All right.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, then I'll just ask again, to what extent, I'm sure we would like to say that happiness in old age is a function of some sort of personal insight, or you've reached some sort of state of something that makes you happy. I was just suggesting that perhaps, though, there is a kind of physical, in order to realize your full potential in old age, perhaps it's easier if you are in fact physically comfortable. And I mean, obviously, if you're ill, even if you have reached old age, you may not be as happy because you're preoccupied with your health. Maybe that is in part, I think we all know it is in part a function of wealth. Easier to remain healthy if you have health care. I'm not trying to be cynical here, but Cephalus does strike me as a kind of guy who's made it and knows he's got it made, and has plenty of reason to be pleased about that. And he doesn't seem to be going too deeply into it. I don't find a lot of wisdom there. I just find a guy who's very satisfied that he's made it, and
So
This raises some very interesting points about which perspective one is looking from. I mean, if you look at everyone on this screen, yeah, we're all upright. We've all got our wits about us, and we're all obviously fairly healthy. But a question in my mind, in happiness, is someone that's undergoing severe dementia like Alzheimer's, are they internally happy?
Can I ask a question? Stan Klein here. I'm happy right now. I'm just walking at Lake Roland Park here near my house. So how does Waldinger's book on the good life and happiness and what makes a happy life come into play in this whole discussion? I read the book, found it fascinating. Are you familiar with it?
No.
I'm not.
Waldinger, I'm not going to belabor it. Waldinger was from Harvard. The book came out recently. He's done TED Talks. He's been interviewed on NPR. And it has to do with what makes a person happy and what makes for the good life, which I think is the name of the book. And it's an 80-year study that's been going on for 80 years. And they interview people from 80 years ago, their siblings, their offspring. And there's one word that comes to mind, not to mind. There's one word that he ascribes the happiness and the good life to. And the people I've mentioned this to in the last few months, some of whom came right up with the word. It's not a quiz. The word is friends. That was the common denominator for a happy life, a good life. And I just thought I'd mention that.
Okay.
Yeah, interesting. I also,
It's an excellent book. It's an excellent book. The study's still going on. It's 80 years going, the longest study they've done of its type.
I think the question of aging and happiness is a very, very interesting one. I found it very interesting in a book as well. And I think I've kind of come to the conclusion that happiness is found in your own truth, finding your own truth, and pursuing that through your life. You know, it changes from time to time. We all change. We've seen things when we were younger. I equate it to walking through a forest. When we're young, the forest is very, very thick and loaded with trees. And as we age, things become clearer. And the forest becomes a little less dense. And we move on to find our own truth in what makes us happy. And is it service to others? Is it whatever your personal truth might be? But I think aging is the pursuit of that, the pursuit of your own inner truth and beliefs.
So on the basis of what Stanley and Adrian have said, and John, has Cephalus lived a good life? Is Cephalus a model for living a good life? Well, what does Socrates think about Cephalus?
I don't find enough there to be able to say that he's lived a good life. He's achieved a comfortable life in his own terms. But
I guess Socrates says here, he says, I think that you're finding old age easy to bear, not because of your character, but because of your great wealth. I suspect we all know people like that. So I don't know that Cephalus led a particularly good life, but he did make some money.
If you take a Christian perspective, wealth is not the reason for a good life. It's just the opposite.
I think
well, go ahead.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
My sense is that it's through this process of dialectical exchange, this critical review of notions that are fundamental to happiness and well-being and a soul that's as good as it can be. It's through this dialectical exchange, which is essentially social, that justice is discovered and that what matters in life is revealed. I mean, it's on display. It's not the position of anyone except Socrates himself. And he espouses it by doing it, by executing the dialectic right in front of us. I think it's significant that Cephalus exits that dialectic early on. And apparently he doesn't reappear anyplace else.
That's right.
So, I mean, to the extent that he is comfortable, he may not be wise. To the extent that he's excluded from the dialogue, he may no longer be searching, at least critically reviewing what is true and valuable and worth living for. So I think his exit is as theatrically significant as his position as it's initially espoused. Apparently he's wealthy, he's comfortable, but is he a wise man and is he fulfilled? I think that without giving an explicit answer, his absence from the rest of the dialogue reveals the answer itself.
I think that's well put. Clearly, he's not. He doesn't have any curiosity.
No.
He doesn't stick with the conversation and says, "Sorry, but I've got to go off and do what?"
He'd rather burn incense than
He's
listen.
not going off to search for the truth. He's
Watch a
going
parade.
for
Yeah.
another celebration.
Yep.
And to Adrian's point, he found satisfaction in his own truth, which is that he earned his money and has made it. And so he's happy with that. And that's as far as he wants to go.
I do find it interesting, though, that he uses, he's saying, it's not old age that makes you happy or unhappy. It's your character. If someone is self-disciplined and good-tempered, old age isn't too much of a burden. Well, to the extent that as we get deeper into this, we learn that self-discipline is, in fact, one of the important virtues or components of morality. He's kind of foreshadowing perhaps where Socrates is going to go with this, but he doesn't seem to be a particularly great role model for the virtue of self-discipline and good temper. I mean, we don't know. If this is all we know about him, then I don't think we can hold him up as much of an exemplar.
Here, I agree.
Let's skip ahead to Thrasymachus then. I mean, there's a good part of the dialogue before that, but then Thrasymachus is really an interesting character because he unlike so many characters in the dialogues by Plato, he seems to be a worthy person to engage because he really does engage and kept saying, "Don't fob me off, Socrates. You always play these tricks and you never take responsibility. So come on and get back and deal with the issues that I'm presenting to you." And Thrasymachus's position is much like that of one member of our class, maybe Lance, if you don't mind my mentioning you because you've said this before, that it all depends. It all depends upon what culture you're in, and what's good in one culture is not the same as what's good in another culture, and even I think that such relativists would say it all depends upon you, what kind of person you are, and the people have different views about what morality is. And my view is that morality is doing good things for your friends and doing bad things for your enemies.
Well,
I was
I think
thinking,
a lot of people would agree with that. I think a lot of people do agree with it. Perhaps not if you put it in quite those terms, but they would approve of it in real life. And I think we have plenty of examples of that. They would vote for such a person, for example. So I find this guy very, very helpful. And right, he's got a lot more on the ball than most of the half-wits who follow Socrates around, but he doesn't have nearly as much on the ball as he thinks he does. Socrates manages to shred him to pieces pretty quickly. I don't know if he knows it because we don't really get much of a response from him after it's all done. But there's not much left of Thrasymachus.
Why?
Why? Well, because he has taken a position that is so antithetical to Socrates uh, point of view, that I think Socrates simply rises to the occasion and takes him apart.
So
I mean,
you're kind of saying that Socrates has the better point of view.
let's say he certainly has better debating skills by far.
Richard, let me put it differently. Is Socrates' view of morality better than Thrasymachus's?
I think it's better defended.
Well, I think he knows how to defend it. Socrates knows that you just attack with questions and you control the conversation, and he just blew him away that way.
So is that the difference between Socrates and Thrasymachus?
That's my difference.
Socrates has better debating skills.
That's a difference.
I don't think he's reached his own truth yet. I think he can go just so far in a discussion, and then he just doesn't have an idea of how to finish that thought, so he walks away, or he turns away from it, or he.
But
he doesn't know his own justice or morality, or I think he's still up in the air about it.
I think he's basing it on totally external rewards and nothing else.
And who gets the external rewards?
He does. He does.
Yeah.
And who else? People in power, he says. People in power, they're the ones who get rewards. And so they have the best life.
Right.
Yeah. It's like might is right.
I'm a little confused. Are we talking now about Polemicus or about the Sophists? Sorry.
We're talking about Thrasymachus and
Thrasymachus, right? But the arguments about doing right by your friends and doing wrong by your enemies, that was Polemicus's argument, was it not?
Sure, but
both of them. I'm sorry.
But it's picked up more seriously by Thrasymachus.
Right. No, there is sort of a soft glide and transition from the one to the other. I think one of the things that I found a little distasteful, and Polemicus took this point of view and drilled down into it, was that Sophocles was basically using other people's arguments against them. He was defeating other people's points of view and not presenting and defending his own, and remaining a little bit, what shall I say, obscure in his embrace of particular positions. I guess that's inherent in Socrates's mode of dialectic, but the way it was presented, I thought, was quite effective. And the more that the dialogue proceeded, the more of that tactic and machination I saw, and I found it distasteful and what shall I say, a little bit hollow on the part of Socrates. I don't know if anyone else had that same impression or that same thought.
Well, I can tell you that of the folks that were in that conversation, I took an immediate dislike to Thrasymachus. It just seemed, it's a very cynical view of morality or of justice. And I've sort of seen, I think I picked up in one of the notes that the Thrasymachus was a sophist, and that it was the sophists' campaign at that time to do away with justice and moral standards. That kind of a might makes right And I found that very distasteful as a liberal Democrat. Just didn't like the guy.
Here, here. That was my reaction too. I found my marginalia. I won't tell you what they were, but I found his arguments to be, let's just say, not of my didn't convince me in any way, and they might be right in the self-congratulatoriness of his. It doesn't matter. It's sort of like an end justifies the means as far as he's concerned, without any more attachment to morality.
But the two of you, at least, and maybe some others, are giving a kind of emotional response to Thrasymachus. You just don't like the guy. But Socrates doesn't ever present himself as not liking people. He never does. He doesn't make fun of Thrasymachus.
No, he doesn't have to. He just he simply takes his argument apart and leaves the man hollowed out.
Yeah, and how does he take his argument apart?
Well,
he questions the truth of it. He keeps questioning him, and he gives him credit for having the ability to reason.
Yes.
well,
In fact, he's quite congratulatory. He's he extols the rationality, the acumen, the insights of his opponents at the same time that he tests their arguments. I mean, he removes himself from ideology. He supersedes preferences that maybe come from the heart or that are aligned with particular political parties or political perspectives, and he deals with arguments as they're presented. And the remarkable thing is he creates dialogue. He creates understanding and discourse across these fundamental differences. Now, I don't understand a lot of his arguments. I'm not sure they actually compel me, but I mean, he goes through the process of creating mutuality in understanding. He does that remarkably well. It's not just, I mean, part of the dialogue process is attack and retreat. Part of it is very aggressive, but an even more important part is this bridging, this creation of a common understanding and the acknowledgement of something that both sides can share and both sides can believe in.
Yeah, I guess I'm trying, though, to say not that you just don't like this guy, and not that you don't like his arguments. That what Socrates does is he is engaging with Thrasymachus and other people, and says, well, let's examine this more closely, and in doing that examination, what he really gets at is to try to get Thrasymachus to see that it's self-contradictory, that there's no way that he can hold to his position with it being logically coherent. There are going to be exceptions to his rules, and then he's got to adjust his position to sort of take those things into consideration. And then Socrates says, well, even then it's self-contradictory because of this and this and this. And so his arguments don't hold up logically, not that there's any emotional issue involved for Socrates. Do you follow that? I don't think that anybody has talked quite about the way Socrates goes about this, the way he goes about saying, well, if you believe this, and you believe this, and this, but this contradicts this, then there's something wrong with this. They can't all be true.
Right. But Thrasymachus, it seems to me, weakens his position
Yes.
by first of all saying to Socrates, "Well, I'm not going to just go along and agree with everything you say. You know, you've got your lackeys who do that, and I'm not going to do that."
Right.
But he does. But he does do that. He does do that. Now he tries to qualify it and save face by saying, "Well, if you say so," and well, uh, I could argue that, but I won't because I see where you're going with it. Uh, so I'm not sure in the end we really get, shall we say, the best presentation of Thrasymachus's point of view from Thrasymachus. If the conclusion is if the sorry if the conclusion at the end of that chapter is as that Socrates has proven that a moral person will be happy and an immoral person will be unhappy. Well, that begs a lot of questions about what is happiness, for example, just for a start. Uh, and Thrasymachus just kind of slinks off and leaves Plato's brothers to take over, and they do a much better job, I think, because they start by saying, "Well, I don't really believe this, but this is here's the argument," and I think they fill in some of the blanks.
But speaking now in favor of character assassination and ad hominem argument, Thrasymachus does at some point in that dialogue call Socrates a bully. And Socrates seems to take it to heart that say, "Yeah, I'm not a bully, and here's the story, Thrasymachus." So, and I also think that, when Socrates was drinking that hemlock, he may have had some ill feelings towards those he might have had some pleasant conversations with earlier in his life.
Yeah. Well, I think I'm sort of questioning the notion that Thrasymachus is a worthy opponent. He's a different kind of opponent than we find in other dialogues, that's for sure. He's a lot more self-confident, but I don't find him really any more persuasive of his point of view. It's a point of view that, let's face it, has legs. We can look around the world and see lots of immoral people who seem pretty damn happy, and that's where I'd like to go with this. And yes, okay, Socrates does eventually get back to that, but
so in a way, what you are asking for is a better argument than Thrasymachus is. In a way, doesn't that get provided then by
yes,
by Plato's brothers?
they do give a better argument.
Oh, yes.
I think they give a more nuanced argument, shall we say. And also, of course, they also they do it in with their own discourse. There's no interruption. Socrates lets them say. I mean, the whole chapter is these guys laying out what they think is a better argument in favor of something they don't believe in or don't want to believe in, but feel that it really hasn't been given its its due.
So in the end, would you say that you then, because of this improvement in the argument, that now you say that is a good argument?
I'm not a good argument. Well, what is good? It's a more coherent.
Does it persuade you?
No, it's a more coherent argument. I don't want to be persuaded by it. Perhaps that's the problem. But
Right. I think
I can recognize the strength of the argument when they present it better than I can when he presents it.
I think as he presents it, the outcome, or at least his intended outcome, is simply to undercut any kind of moral or rational justification for justice itself, and to create a kind of moral relativism, to make people, make the audience, at least the small audience that's part of the dialogue, indifferent between justice and injustice, and not to support injustice per se, but to suggest that it makes no moral or material difference which side of the argument you're on.
Ron, let me
That's
just
very constructive.
interject here. One of the things that Waterfield does in his translation is he changes some of the words from the traditional one. And the big one, of course, that he changes is justice. And instead of this dialogue being about justice, he says he thinks it makes more sense to read this dialogue as about morality. And so in most, not in every single case, but in most cases where other translators have said justice, he uses the word morality. I'll just mention that.
I have to confess, I could not find a copy of his translation, so I used another. Where justice is everywhere.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Yeah. So, and that is the traditional translation, justice.
Well, thank you for that translation, because I found the question of morality, which obviously hangs over all these things, easier to deal with than the word justice, which dragged us into courts and legal jurisprudence and right and wrong in ways that I didn't find as easy to manage. Whereas I found the morality litmus test a easier concept to stay with.
So one of the things that Socrates says, I think that, as Richard points out, the argument gets better and better, but Socrates continues to challenge even better versions of the argument. But they're not really finished yet. And Socrates then says, well, maybe we can get at this better by thinking of a city, and the three parts of a city being like the three parts of a mind, or the three parts that can explain what justice is. So that's for next time that we will do that. Start looking at this notion of justice in terms of how a good city is. But let me go back to one other thing that Socrates presents what Waterfield translates as a mind problem, and this is very anachronistic, because you won't find that in any translation of the Republic that you look at to talk about a mind problem. So I'm going to send something.
A mind experiment? Is that a mind experiment?
Yes, a mind experiment. That's what I meant. And
Yeah.
so I'll send something out about that, and I don't want to get into that now. But let's look just briefly, at least, at this so-called mind experiment with the story about the ring of Gyges. Gyges has this ring, which if you put it on, you become totally invisible. Now imagine, what would you like to do wearing such a ring? You can't be found guilty of anything because you are totally invisible. What would you like to do? Let's leave out sexual things.
Well, this guy doesn't. He seduced the king's wife and killed the king.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
You're done?
What would you like? What would any of you like to do if you were invisible?
I must say it's a fresh thought. I've never considered it. So I'm having trouble.
It is a fresh thought. I've always tried to keep a high profile, but
Okay, think about that. You are invisible. What would you like to do?
I'm thinking of the play Hamilton and the song, I Want to Be in the Room Where It Happened.
Right. But they have to know you're in the room, don't they? I don't know. Go into the surveillance business, I guess. I don't.
I think I'd like to sit in the Kremlin and listen to Mr.
Yeah.
Putin.
Tony,
Right.
Tony, Tony, I don't wish to intrude into your privacy, but you look as if you are having a lot of fun imagining.
I am. I'm a little
You don't need to tell us what it is, but
Can you hear me?
yes.
Yeah.
I'm a little handicapped because as of this morning, my book hasn't arrived, so I'm doing a lot of listening. I did some research, and so I have the gist of it. And I'm going to have a lot of questions next time. As for what I would do if I had that ring, a lot of things come to mind, and it's such an important question. I'm afraid I have to give a much more important answer. So I have to think about it.
Okay. Nice.
So if I can just follow up on that comment, I was wondering about pre-reading, and so were we expecting a book for pre-reading?
Say that again, excuse me.
Were we expecting to receive a book for pre-reading for this series?
No.
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 Oh, Tony just made a comment about. Oh, she ordered a book, obviously. Okay.
I ordered a book, and
Okay.
but I did do a lot of research and reading, so that what you all are speaking of, I have some sense of understanding.
Okay.
I would like to add, though, that what has come to mind quite a bit in all of these conversations is that there's so many variances to the rules, and that make it so much more than an answer to what is truth and what is justice is not black and white. I had a conversation with a friend who is Amish, and he was given a pass for religious purposes not to fight in World War II. And I asked him a question about what he thought about the evil of Hitler. And he said that they believed in not necessarily non-violence, but non-resistance. That and I said, well, so it's up to others that have to give up their lives so that you can live in peace. And he says, well, we believe in non-resistance was the only answer. So in a world that is evil, you can establish your own morality, but and the comment about you doing right by your friends and doing wrong by your enemies turns you into somebody that you don't want to be in order to contend with your enemies. And the Amish are not willing to do wrong by their enemies. They're willing. They live in a world of non-resistance to violence, or yes, resistance to violence. So everything that we're saying here this morning in some way relates to your interaction with others in the world. And if you choose to compromise yourself in any way in order to do away with evil.
Interesting. How does Socrates deal with the question that is that, and Tony, you want to be called Tony, right?
Oh, yes, that's fine.
Yeah. The question that Tony raises is, doesn't that come up in the discussion about what Socrates thinks about treating your enemies?
One of
For
the
me?
arguments that,
Oh.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
One of the arguments that he makes, I think, is that it's difficult sometimes to know who your friends are and who your enemies are. And I think that's true. I mean, look at the international arena with nations with different interests and different alignments. Who is on one side, who is on the other? Not very clear from week to week.
Yeah, okay, that's a very Socratic position, isn't it? That you might not know, people you might think are your friends might not be your friends really behind your back. People who you think are enemies might be really doing some good things for you that you're not aware of. So at least it puts it in a questionable form for Socrates. Okay, now have you done some more thinking about what you would do as when you were invisible?
If I had the ring, what I would do? It's a really hard question.
Yeah, okay, don't just think.
I will have an answer at some point.
Okay. Anybody else have a good thought about it?
I don't, because it's such an abstract question. I think
Oh, just use your imagination.
the point of the ring here, the point of the ring story is simply to make the point that some people will act immorally and others will not. Some will take advantage of their invisibility and will break the law, etc. Do as they please.
Did Tolkien plagiarize this story?
I think so. Yeah. And if you're trying to get some of us to acknowledge that we would do immoral things, I don't think you're going to get much of a response.
Yeah, that's why I don't want to put anyone on the spot. I just
I was thinking if I were invisible though, and I mean, I things that are illegal might not be immoral. I might want to maybe get into Mar-a-Lago and try to mess things up as best I could over there, more so than they already are, but might be illegal, but I don't know that would necessarily be immoral. Would it?
Well, is that something you'd like to do?
I think it might be. I'd rather avoid Florida in the summertime, but if I had to, and I were only invisible for a short while, I might go down there anyway.
What's the old? Everything I like is either immoral, illegal, or fattening. If you were invisible, you wouldn't have to worry about fattening.
I want to ask Lance the question why he doesn't consider breaking an entry, theft, and mischievous damage and arson or whatever as immoral.
Because I think it would justify the greatest good, for the greatest number.
Oh, you would,
if you will.
And how would you do that?
That action.
How would you define that and support that and justify it?
How would I justify it?
Yes,
I would justify it again as trying to secure the greatest good for the greatest number of people, and I think that justifies itself.
Yeah.
Speaks for itself.
I think you're on very shaky moral ground.
Aren't you? Isn't that Thrasymachus's argument? You're advantaging your friends.
I think I found the whole discussion
jumping
by
on
many of these folks is a little self-centered. Is what's good for me, is what's making my life the best. And I think that the general liberal democratic milieu in which we live, especially in this particular area, thank God, is that we're looking to what's going to benefit other people more than what's going to necessarily benefit us.
Sure. But talk to the January 6th people. They would take a very different view of that, wouldn't they?
I think they would.
They would justify breaking and entering on precisely the same grounds.
I would love to have some of those folks in these little boxes that I'm looking at and hear what they have to say. I'm sure it'd be very fascinating.
How do you
They're all in jail.
How do you determine?
Yeah, I think they have a different opinion now that they're in jail.
Perhaps.
I doubt it.
Who is entitled to determine the greatest good for the greatest number of people?
What a great question. What a great question. Lance, there's the question.
Well, I tell you, I mean, I could be a philosopher king perhaps and do that. I don't want to jump ahead in the book here, but
so you're a god, are you?
Well, I don't think they thought they were gods necessarily, were they? I mean, they give some homage to the gods later on in this treatise, but it is what it is.
I have a slightly different read on this. From my point of view, someone who has invisibility or who assumes an invisible posture basically abrogates their identity. They forfeit their effectiveness in the world for good or evil, but they become inauthentic. Maybe this is an existential point of view. It happens to be my own, but I think that someone who becomes invisible basically surrenders a lot of authority, including the authority of a citizen. I mean, it's not just a matter of not breaking laws, it's a matter of forfeiting your effectiveness in society. I mean, to be able to walk into a sauna or walk into a savings and loan or walk into a candy shop invisible and do what you want, it seems to me is not just morally irresponsible, but it's also completely inauthentic. It makes the perpetrator what shall I say, a ineffective person. The consequences that come from being visible, from being known, are what I think keep people on the side of morality and make them full and fulfilled individuals.
Well,
I think there's some very valuable points, and it raises in my mind: is AI the modern version of the ring?
Of invisibility, I think that what you say makes a great deal of sense. I mean, I don't know if anyone else has had any experience with AI. My son suggested that I use it. I was writing a proposal for something anyway, and I found a version of that of an AI system, and I queried it, and it gave me remarkable in-depth answers to a lot of complicated questions, which I then proceeded to put into this proposal. And I probably, after I did it though, I felt badly. Actually, I hoped that there would be no more follow through, and I was resolved not to do it again. It was really egregious. I felt like I had been, as I said, inauthentic.
I think that's brilliant.
Yeah, let me just formulate what Ron's point for a moment. He is saying, with respect to the Ring of Gyges mind experiment, that before he will participate in that experiment, he will imagine what it would be like for him to participate, and he's described the problematical nature of participating in that experiment. And so he says, I'm not going to participate. That's my way of dealing with that. That's correct, isn't it?
I think so.
Okay.
It's also the case. I love this, and this is just a tiny footnote, but I love the mode of expression for acceptance and alignment. When Socrates makes a telling point, his conversationalists, his audience, acknowledge its significance by responding, "I think so," as if they've assimilated the point and adopted his point of view, and correspondingly reoriented their moral compass. It's there are a couple other expressions like that. I see your point of view. I acknowledge your point of view. I mean, none of this is anything except polite interchange and acknowledgement. All of it striving upward. None of it vituperative. None of it aggressive and angry. None of it disdainful of different positions. There's a certain level of civility, of polite exchange that runs through everything that I've read so far.
But you don't see any real progress then. It's just a conversation that could be taking place in a pub someplace or in a tea room or something. And it's just a polite conversation that's going on. And we really shouldn't take it too seriously.
Well, what would you define progress as being? If progress means, getting closer to the truth or opening somebody up to a different possibility, that might be progress.
Yes, I like that. At least in an individual sense, but in the sense that somebody sees another point of view and decides, well, gee whiz, that's a little more right than what I thought before, and therefore they move. And I think they move, query in what direction. Going back to Ron's point, I thought was excellent about authenticity and taking responsibility for a point of view. At some juncture, you got to stop back and forthing and step forward and act. And so, my personal string is rather short in that regard. If I find it easier to conclude that this sounds more right than that, then it's easier for me to step in that direction. That's progress.
Can I just back up and say that one of the things that I think gets Thrasymachus off to a bad start is that rather than say there is no such thing as morality, which is really what he's saying, I think, he uses the word to mean its exact opposite, or if not its opposite, then a variant on it. I think he is really saying he's speaking on behalf of amorality, but he's locked into these categories of morality and immorality, and he ends up basically reversing them and saying, the moral person is the one who behaves immorally on behalf of the ends that he believes in. I think, a more fundamental critique of the moral position would be simply to say there is no intrinsic thing. There is nothing in this world, that we can define as morality or justice, because in a sense that's what he is saying.
But it doesn't he say then well, if you're going to use that word, then it means one thing to one person and one thing to another person. And so you're quite right in his position as one that there is no pure morality.
Yes.
Socrates is going to say, well, let's look at that, and we'll look at the way you use the word, and I'll show, and you use the word in a way that's really talking about it as amoral, as you say, and I'm going to show you what's wrong with that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think, I mean, perhaps it would be a stronger argument if it were presented that way instead of trying to use the word and then change its definition. But so much of what's going on in that chapter just seems to be wordplay anyway. It's so abstract. Even though I don't think any contemporary reader can read it without plugging in what we see as real world examples of exactly what this guy is defending. Right? I'd like to, if you want a mind experiment, try reading that chapter without thinking about, if you're a liberal Democrat at least, Donald Trump. A guy who seems to get away with it, so there we go.
I was willing to take care of that issue, but I encountered opposition.
Yeah, I don't want to turn this into a political debate, but I'm just saying that I think, we have that kind of subtext in our minds, and that makes it a more compelling discussion, I suppose.
Okay, so we've reached the point now. I think that it's fair to say that in our discussion, we've reached the point where we're not quite sure what he's talking about. We're not quite sure what he's talking about as what morality is all about and what is the moral life. So we need to kind of pursue this in some other way. And so I'm going to propose another mind experiment. I'm going to propose that we think about the mind as being sort of like a city, which has this kind of population that we will enable us to get clearer about what we mean by morality. And so we'll have to see if this works, whether this mind experiment works. So we're going to turn to that to see if we get out of this muddle. We've been in a muddle in this discussion. Excuse me. We've been in a muddle that we're left with because we're not yet clear about this. So at our next meeting next week, we're going to get clearer. And I hope the rest of our class will join us. I'm going to see what they were up to.
Can I get a recommended reading for next week's meeting?
You may. Go ahead.
No, he's asking.
Oh,
Yeah.
John.
Yes.
Which
you're
chapter?
asking.
Could I get a recommended reading for next week's?
Oh, I thought that you were asking whether you could give it to us.
No.
No. I will. I'm going to write something up before the next meeting.
Okay.
And give it to you.
Okay. Thank you.
We don't need any outside reading. We've got all good thinkers enrolled in the class here, so we don't need to look for some authority. Okay.
Thank you.
So
Thank you, Forrest.
Nice to meet you all.
We'll see you next time.
Thank
Yes,
you.
indeed.
Thanks, everybody.
Have a good week.
Thank all of you.
Bye-bye.